When you think North and South, what comes to mind?
Um, on experiential, it was rather a drama. Um, Movie sets are always about like a second reality. Have you ever spent any time on a movie set?
No, not at all. No.
So it's sort of an artificial world. You will gather with your colleagues and spend anywhere from a day to months with them in these artificial circumstances where you're coming to a set every day and you spend a lot of time at the set, and as you probably know, you spend a lot of time waiting on the set, and then in the evening, if you're on location somewhere, you may or may not know the area. And so it's common for you to then go to dinner with your colleagues or go out and have some fun or do something else, sightsee, go dancing or whatever. And North and South was one of those productions where um, it went on for months and you're on different locations. And so the alternate world that kind of comes to life becomes as memorable as the process of making the movie. So I remember that, and then I just have my own personal takes on it. Some associations that I don't know if they have any value or not, but they were just personal associations. Like I never felt like I did very good work in that TV series. So I was never happy with what I did in that. That was the personal takeaway. But on a sort of a grander scale, there was just all kinds of dramas going on behind the cameras that are most memorable to me.
Can you remember sort of getting the part and how it came about?
Yeah, I was brought in to audition, and actually, um, I was originally brought in for the role that Philip Kasnov eventually played, and I screen tested for that. And my understanding of it was is that they liked me very much for that role, but James and Patrick looked older than me, so they didn't look like I could be a peer of theirs at that time. And that's true. James is, I think, 7 years older than me, and I don't remember how much older Patrick was or is than me. But so we didn't quite line up. So then they offered me the role of Forbes after that screen test.
And it was a huge production, thousands of extras, thousands of costumes, established names. Did it feel like a big deal at the time?
Yeah, kind of, because my one disappointment was in not getting. And forgive me, but the Philip Kasnov's character slips my mind. Can you remind me of his character name?
Yeah, it's Elkanah Bent.
So that particular role, that character was the only person that got to work with Elizabeth Taylor.
Right.
And I was super disappointed that I couldn't have that on my resume, that I worked with Elizabeth Taylor, because clearly, you know, um, being an iconic actress, and then, near the end of her working life, in addition to the fact that one of my aunts was a dyed in the wool fan of hers, it would have been a nice little feather in my cap that I got to work with her. So that was kind of a disappointment. And but at the same time, there was a certain excitement because it was a big cast. I became friends with Forrest Whitaker on that cast, and James and Wendy became lifelong friends of mine, and there was some good names. It was fun because I was in another film with John Stockwell, who played and my nemesis in Christine. I don't know if you know the movie Christine, but he was my nemesis in that, and he's my nemesis in this. And we have a fight in Christine, and we have a fight in this. So, there was yeah, it did feel big and exciting, even just at the very beginning.
And sort of how aware were you, if at all, of the books that were written by um, John Jakes? Were you aware of them, or did you sort of find out about them as a result of then appearing in the series?
Well, it wasn't a book that I had read prior to getting the audition. but I did read parts of the book. There's actually my name is Ostrander, and yet it's not a very common name. And in the United States, all people who are named Ostrander have a singular ancestry. We all go back to a, our ancestors came from the Netherlands in 1675 or something like that on a ship called the Spotted Cow, and they were named Peterson. And then when they got here to the United States at the end of the 17th century, they changed their name to Ostrander, which means in German or Dutch the East Bank or the East Beach, and they don't know why. But at any rate, um, my point of telling you all that is it's an uncommon name, and yet he used that name in the book. There was an Ostrander in the book, and my great grandfather was in the Civil War, and he was captured, and he was in an Ohio regiment, and so there was I had to ask the author if he actually had looked into the historical record and received that name and used it from that, which was kind of been a fun circular connection for me, or whether it was just random or how he came to that name. It turns out it was like he had a high school friend or something like that with that last name. So it wasn't my grandfather, but there was enough coincidence there from the book that was, a nice coincidence for me.
And you touched on it at the very start, and obviously you say it wasn't the sort of the part that you initially um, auditioned for, but how did you find playing Forbes, and what did it mean to you? Because I suppose his character was very, very charming, very watchable, but I think it's also fair to say he had a bit of a dark side and could be influenced down the wrong direction as well.
Yeah, I think I could have run with it more. I think I was a little bit too self-conscious in that film, and I don't know that um, to do a show like that is tremendous amount of work. And Richard, our director, has is trying to tell a good story under that watch. Keep it coming. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Which makes it very challenging. It means that you kind of have to know who your character is pretty strongly right away, and you bring that. And in this type of drama also in my mind there's I don't know if it's style is the right word to call it, but there's you have to have a certain freedom in a direction that I mean you always have to have freedom when you're doing a role no matter what the style might be, but it's like heightened reality or something. Does that make sense? It's not we're not doing Long Day's Journey into Night. We're not doing, something that's really digging into the bowels of, your emotional depths, and you're really not. I don't know. It's not. It's a different kind of pacing almost. It's a different. You indulge in the characterization in my mind. That's how I look at it. You kind of indulge that characterization, and I think I could have indulged further. I learned some lessons from Terry actually, um, my co-star in there, Terry Garber, that, I think I think I could have done more with that. And Forbes was a fun character to play in the sense that, he's a rascal and he's a sensualist and he didn't seem to have any tethers anywhere. He didn't have any tethers. So, oh, somebody's being whipped today. Huh, well, that's interesting. Well, there's a hot girl. Yeah, let me talk to her. Yeah, I feel like getting drunk tonight. I mean, what I mean? So there was a lot of freedom in that character. And I think I could have explored that more.
And you touched on it there, but obviously a lot of your scenes, I'd say, were sort of with two of the key players in the show. It'd be great to sort of get your thoughts on them. Obviously, firstly, um, Terry Garber, as you just mentioned, as Ashton. Sort of, what are your memories of working with her?
Well, Terry is a very fine human being. And uh, I've kind of, I didn't really have a lot of time with her personally, but I will tell you that we were and I've told her this story myself. We were in South Carolina, I believe it was, and we went into a shop on one of our off hours. And we were walking around, and some shopkeeper had made some really disparaging and racist remarks, and the environment allows for that in that part of the South at that time. But Terry wanted none of it, and she was like, "Okay, thank you," and she just turned around and walked out. And it was a very small thing, but it was very impactful to me because, she had to honor her what was the right thing to do at that moment. I mean, she was very clear about it. There was no waffling on that moment or no giving them a break or an excuse. It was just like just an intolerance of that kind of racism, and just walked out. And I always admired her for that. That sometimes when you're in those situations, you try to give the other person a little bit of slack for how they're behaving, maybe because that's in their backyard. But she wanted none of it, and I always admired that about her.
Mm. No, it's a likable quality for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and what was it like working with David Carradine? Because I suppose he was one of the more established figures at that point, really.
Well, in David, you didn't have conversations with David. In maybe other people did, but you didn't have conversations with him. You just listened while he went off. And he, through the show, um, kept to largely to himself and his. I think he had a girlfriend, or I don't know if it was his girlfriend or wife at the time. I remember that he bought a bunch of puppies. There's a type of dog called a Catahoula, which is known, I think, for or either herding. I think it's a herding dog. And he brought a bunch of these puppies into the hotel room, and they crapped all over the place, and he got kicked out. And I remember going to one of the ballroom scenes, and David Carradine liked to go barefoot all the time. And you know, he came to the ballroom scene, and he clearly had been indulging in some alcohol before. And so I thought he was hysterical. He was just, you know, feeling no pain, and doing this recording. I mean, I don't think anybody noticed that in his acting, but on set, I thought it was kind of amusing. So the one story that I think is kind of funny is jump ahead now, 25, let's see, it would have been about 25 years. And there was an international film festival here in San Luis Obispo where I live, and it was going to be held out at this ranch. And one of the owners of the ranch had purchased a 5/8 scale model steam locomotive and a couple of cars, and they were going to show a film of his father's. They were sort of honoring John Carradine, who'd made like 500 movies, and this was supposedly one of his best movies. So they asked me, because David was going to appear with one of his brothers. I think it was Robert that came, and they asked me, because I had horses and things, if I would rob the train on horseback. And David would then come with these guns and then rob the train for the spectators. You know what I mean? Just kind of a little gimmicky, fun thing to do. And I was all over it. It's like, have you ever interviewed somebody who's actually stopped a train on horseback, like a 19th century criminal? Uh, so I got my horses out, and running alongside the train and practicing and all that. And I brought along these black powder guns that would be replicas of the day. And I remember giving it to David, and I'm thinking, oh, this would be fun reconnecting with this guy I worked with all these years ago. So I said, well, here's one of these black powder guns, and you just, you do this and this with it. It wasn't, I wasn't trying to instruct him. I was just trying to give him a little bit of background, and just in case, I don't know what his knowledge was. And he just looked at me with such contempt and say, thanks. I thought, well, you know what? Fuck off. I don't need you, but dude, I thought it would be kind of cool. So that was my last experience with him.
You touched on it earlier, but obviously, um, Forbes sort of meets his end trying to kill Billy Hazard, who, as you said in book one, was portrayed by um, John Stockwell. And as you say, you were both in Christine a couple of years before and had your fight there. So I guess it's kind of ironic that the two of you should then sort of have part two basically and go at it again.
Well, I don't know if I would call it a thrill. I wanted to win that fight. Because in Christine he punches me and I don't have a chance to go after him, and then in North and South, he stabs me and I don't have a chance to win. So, it was less of a thrill and more of an obligation. Like,
It was competitive.
well, from my side anyway, probably not for him. That's just me.
Fair enough. Um, And again, obviously, you mentioned obviously you're still friends with James Reed and Wendy. Have you sort of crossed paths, well, and of course David Carradine, but have you sort of crossed paths with many of the actors since, or is it very much, everyone goes off and does their own thing, and North and South was then, and everyone does their own thing?
Well, I Forrest Whitaker and I became very close friends at the after that film, and then in fact, I helped him get an apartment in the building that I was living in at that time, and we became very close friends for a number of years. And then life circumstances, we kind of drifted away and we're doing different things in different places. And I haven't seen Forrest now for many years, but I still think fondly of him. And Jonathan Frakes is or was a friend of James. So I had, seen him in a couple of situations with James. Other than that, I saw Leslie Ann Down. Um, I guess there was a a very small reunion piece a couple of years ago, and Leslie Ann was there. And I think also I had contacted Morgan Fairchild.
Yes.
Sorry, Morgan Fairchild. And I spoke with Morgan a few times because I was running for public office, and a lot of people don't know that she's quite a bright lady, and I had tried to engage her on some things with my campaign, but I haven't really seen many others from the show. John Stockwell, I saw at one reunion for Christine, but other than that, I really don't see many of those people now.
And what was it like recreating that time period, being on location and getting a flavor of that setting and all of its complexities?
Well, I had experienced doing a reenactment before. And in fact, at one point in the movie, I dressed up as a Mexican soldier and was part of one of the reenactments, but nobody knows that, and I'm not credited in it. I just did it for fun because it seemed like it would be kind of cool thing. Um, and I actually did it, and then went up to the director afterwards and said, "Hello," pulled my mustache off. But it's quite easy to kind of fall into the cultural aspects of it because the South is still has its mansions, it still has its antebellum homes, it still has much of that flavor because it's preserved, right? So, and they chose locations which are preserved or carry some of those characteristics with it. The uncomfortable part, and part of the things that I think I should have done better as an actor, was ridding myself of 21st century, or excuse me, at that time 20th century feelings about racism and slavery and the appalling circumstances of which we treated so many people. And I think I could have done more work there. I don't feel like I don't feel like I did as much work as I should have on that. And you don't necessarily realize that until, there's a scene in which I'm watching, some person being whipped. Um, and I don't know if you can prepare yourself for that. I mean, you should. I don't think I prepared myself to know how I felt about that. It was a contradiction for me as a human being and somebody that has done a lot of work to help our world, I hope. And then watching somebody be flogged like that, it's a stark contrast to your feelings and your sensibilities and your sense of humanity. And I think I could have done more work on it. That was the hardest part for me, actually, just to kind of put that aside or revel in that. And I'd like to have done that better. I'd like to have had that chance to do that over again now. But everything else was kind of nice to fall into.
In terms of the production, have you experienced much else like it, or was it sort of completely unique?
Um, well, it was, like any other movie, there was, cameras and the whole thing like you would be shooting another movie. But the difference is let's just say like I was working with John Carpenter, who's also a pretty efficient director, but in a film time as opposed to television time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Film time, you have a bit more time in most circumstances to get it right, to make sure that you're where you want to be. In television, you just got to get it right first time. And if it's not right, it is what it is. So you better not be too far off. So the difference for me was, like if I did Christine and working with John Carpenter, I'd say, John, I can do this A, B, or C. Which one do you like? And he would say, well, let's try B. And then we would do a rehearsal, and then and then go away. They'd set lighting, and then you come back, you do a rehearsal again, then one for camera, and then you maybe shoot. And so we might do 6 takes on any given scene, but it was done efficiently. But in North and South, set the lighting up, come in here, run the lines quick, 1 take, maybe 2 takes, and you're done. You're moved on to the next location, constantly moving. And I think that that so that was different, and yet it's the same, if that makes sense.
Mm.
It's just a more hurried pace.
And do you wish that sort of your character could have stuck around longer? I mean, I appreciate when a character gets killed, a character gets killed, and you're in plenty of it anyway. But there's a lot of hours there. There's a lot of material, and I think for the most part, it seems like most people that were involved really kind of had a fun time with it. So do you perhaps wish that it could have been drawn out a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it would have been much. It would have been great if I could have been in the other books or continued more with even within the first piece. Like I said, I feel like I could have. I know now that there are things that I would have changed and done better and so forth. And I'm not trying to beat myself up here. I'm just trying to be candid. So yeah, I would have liked to have done more and had more of a chance to explore that character and probably get a little bit more comfortable with different aspects of it. And I think yeah, that would have been a lot of fun, but it didn't work out that way. So, there you go.
And are you finding that people still recognize you from North and South? Is it something that's kind of followed you around in the nicest possible way?
Not so much. I mean, certainly there are people when they realize it's me will be, usually are flattering, but 40 years is a long time to age and still be able to be recognized, especially because, whenever you're doing a part, you usually try to alter your appearance somewhat. So, changing my appearance over time and things like that, in addition to 40 years, most people aren't going to recognize me from that walking down the street. But I think that's true with any of my films. It's not just because of North and South.
And obviously, you mentioned the fact it's been 40 years. The 40th anniversary of book one is next year. So, what do you think is the legacy of North and South, and how do you sort of reflect on it? Because I think the audience that first saw it, I think, still come back to it. I also think it's kind of finding, new generations as well.
Well, I think there's a very attractive um, what do I let's see. I was kind of an attractive gentility, right? There's like an attractive gentility to it that I think is very appealing to people. The homes are beautiful. I mean, if you're driving down these long driveways, they're tree lined with these massive trees that they're very impactful. It's a very visually sensuous environment, right? And then you have this horrible humanity aspect of humanity there. At the same time, you have these women in costumes, whether or not it was real or how much of that was true in real life. But you know, you see these women constantly uh, uh, looking their best, and of course the dresses are cut low, so you're seeing the heaving bosom. So it has sensuality, it has you know, sexuality, it has, you know, the negative aspects of humanity. I think it contains so much rich emotional territory that's all encompassed in one sort of drama that makes it engaging and tasty, you know. So I'm not surprised that other people still find it appealing.
Um, and I think the series has aged well, and it still stands up. Um, does it feel like it was 40 years ago, or does it feel like, you know, not necessarily yesterday, but does it still feel kind of quite sort of current in your mind?
Well, um, another I've talked a couple times about Christine because that film has had more legs for my career than has North and South. In fact, I'm going to do an autograph show this next week for Christine, and I constantly get asked for autographs and to talk about that movie. So it doesn't feel quite as fresh and relevant for my career that, but I imagine for somebody like James or Wendy or um, you know, Patrick, were he alive, or some of the others where, you know, they were in all three books, it that might be a completely different answer. But for me, being a co-starring role in something, it's probably less prevalent, less obvious in my film life. But it was a warm experience, and it was you know, memorable experience. I had connections on that film in other ways, and if it has nothing really to do with the film other than my neighbor at the time was an Indian chap who was a professional cook, and he was working for William Friedkin. And William Friedkin at that time was married to Leslie Ann Down, and they weren't getting along at that moment in their life, and she had a new baby. And at nighttime, it would be Kirstie Alley, Patrick Swayze, myself, and Leslie Ann Down, and a few others that would go out to a club in Charleston, South Carolina, and we would have fun from about. They'd actually close the club for us. So now there's like this whole group of us, and because William Friedkin was not on set and his lovely wife was, you know, and in fact, the first time I saw her, she took my breath away. Oh my God, her skin was just perfect. She was so gorgeous. And I ended up getting a call from William Friedkin, the director, to tell tales on his wife of what she was doing or what was going on. And of course, I wanted no part of that. And yet, as a young actor, you're also going like, oh my God, I want to work for William Friedkin. So it was this, and then my neighbors engaged in it. So I had this other kind of drama, and I was friends with Jim and Wendy, and then I used to go dance with Kirstie Alley all the time because she was a great dancer. Oh my God, you know, it was she followed and could do pretty much anything that I did. So I had a great time with her. So there's this all other drama. That's the thing I was talking about in the beginning of this whole other thing going on behind the scenes. You know, Gene Simmons. Here's a woman who was in Guys and Dolls with Marlon Brando. You know, that was so, it was just so fun to look see some of these older actors that, and you trace their roots back decades into filmmaking. You know, that was part of the fun part about North and South too, is that, you know, the cast was so big and varied and wild, and old iconic film actors and young new talents. You know, so it was a great experience all the way around, and I enjoyed being in the South for that period of time, and it was a surprising how many people would Southerners at that time, I'm talking about 40 years ago, but would say the South will rise again. You're like, really? I thought that was kind of, it was eye-opening.
And you mentioned Gene Simmons there, and obviously, the show had many guest stars. Obviously, you mentioned like Elizabeth Taylor as well. Were they, particularly Gene Simmons and people like that, were they quite approachable? Because I guess, kind of as you touched on, it must have been kind of surreal to think I'm doing this with them. We're in the same thing. We're all part of the same work, if that makes sense.
Well, were they approachable? I'll give you an illustration. One day it was particularly hot, and we're all in costumes and we have wigs on and all kinds of stuff like that. And somebody was talking about how hot it was and or about not having enough chairs to sit on. And Patrick Swayze said to Gene Simmons, you know, well, you could sit on my face if it wasn't so hot. So, I mean, he had the temerity to say this to one of, Hollywood's, legends, in the film industry. So no, they were very approachable, very friendly. And David Carradine was just one of those people who it didn't matter. He was at that time just kind of like in another world. He's always been in his own world. So he wasn't approachable, but it wasn't because he was being egotistical. It's just kind of who he is as a person in my experience.